Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to our first Touch Designer tutorial. What I'm going to do for this course is make a series of short videos that introduce a bunch of different skills in certain categories, but then I'm going to leave it up to you to really play around and engage with the ideas we discuss in class to make something of your own. What I've made here for a demonstration today is I've taken one of your video samples from your the first half of semester. This is one of Jivon's, or a little piece of one of Jivon's works. And I've just combined it with a different soundtrack and started to play around with some very basic 2D compositing effects. So what we're going to do in this installation, I might just turn this sound down for a moment. What we're going to do in this video is, first of all, I will show you how to get started and set up a new Touch Designer project, and then we're going to do a bunch of these 2D compositing effects. The reason I had that music on is I find it just kind of fun to put on some sort of track or rhythm or sound that just gets you into the rhythm of working, and I really like this kind of slow, strange beat. So, and that's what I was using in the file. And I'll bring that in a little bit later. But let's get set up with Touch Designer. What you're going to need to do first is just go to this website, which I'll link in the description, and download Touch Designer either for Windows or Mac. And you can start a free account, and the free account has a few limitations, but for our purposes, they're perfectly fine. The main limitation you're going to encounter is resolution. Our output resolution, which you can see here, 1280 by 720 pixels rather than full HD. But for what we're going to be doing, and for a lot of your work, it's perfectly fine. Okay, so I'm going to start a new file. I'll just quit that. And you'll see what Touch Designer looks like when you load it up. Okay, so when you open Touch Designer, you'll get something like this. This is a 2D, it's a movie file in doing some displacement with noise, making this kind of funky jelly bean wavy output. What we're going to do first, before we do any work here, is we're going to create a new project folder. And I actually made one previously, which I'm just going to quickly delete because I don't think I need it. I've got everything else there. Yep, that's cool. So I'm just going to delete this one, and I'll start again so we can work together. Okay, so I'm going to create a project folder, and it's going to ask me where I want to put it, and I'm going to navigate, in my case, to my teaching folder. Yours will be, I guess, where you keep your projects, and we discussed this in week 1, file organization. And within this course, I will just click open. And what that'll do is it's going to create a new folder directory. It's really, really nice. I'm going to call this pn_touch_designer. That's fine. And it's going to make all these different folders. So hit create, and you can see it's made all these folders for us, which is really handy. And then I'm going to hit save. And when I hit save, it's made a project file. This one, touchdesigner.toe. And what's nice in Touch Designer, if I hit save a couple of times, it's actually making a new version of my file. And if I go back to my Finder, it's actually put the file I'm working on here, pn touchdesigner2.toe, and it's put number 1 in the backup folder. It's really great, really kind of handy feature. I'm going to make one little change here. I've got some audio that I was working with. Let me just remember which file it was. I think it was, yes, it's this one. I'm just going to copy and paste this file into the audio directory that Touch Designer made for me. And it's also made a movie directory. So I'm going to put the video sample that I started with, which was from some of your work. I took a bunch of samples from your projects, and I liked this piece of footage from Jivon, so I'm just going to copy that and also put it in here. The reason I'm doing this is that if I ever want to take this project and put it on another computer, if everything is in the correct directory here, if I take this whole folder and sort of compress it, put it on a USB, decompress it, copy it onto a new computer, Touch Designer should be able to find all of these dependent files. And that's really important. Otherwise, it can be super annoying to kind of relink all your files. Okay, so let's start playing around. Now we've saved, we've got our project directory, we're ready to work. Okay, so first of all, this interface. What we're looking at is visual programming. So all of these little blocks, you can think of them as, in this case, this is a movie file in, so it's a piece of data. This is a noise generator, so that's generating a signal. Some of the things you might connect might be functions. Here, this output would send it to our projector. But you can think of them as just sort of either referencing files or referencing functions, and we connect them together, moving from left to right in order to make whatever project we want to do. So I think this will make sense as we get moving. So left click, just for some basic things, left click with your mouse will pan you across the network. Right click will select. I can left click to select one, or I can right click to drag select. I can click on one and hit delete. I can sometimes you can't select here. I can't select because it's in this viewer active mode. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But if you can't select it, you can just click this little thing here, hit delete, and I can just right click and hit delete. Okay, so now we have a completely empty network. So if I double click with my left mouse, I get all of these different nodes I can create. If I just click on a random one, like rectangle, I get a two-dimensional rectangle input. We're going to go through all of these. We'll discover them as we work, but in a very basic description, tops are texture operators. They are two-dimensional components typically. Think of 2D noise, 2D compositing, wanting to put one layer on top of another, things like that. Chops are channel operators. Think of them like signals. So you might have something like, what's one we use all the time? An LFO. It's just a number that's oscillating between -1 and 1. Very handy to drive all sorts of animations. SOP, surface operator. These are 3D. Think of cubes and spheres and things like that. When we use a SOP, we might need a material. If you've ever done any work in Blender or Maya, a material is something that gives a 3D shape its color and surface properties. DATs, I think it just stands for data operators. These are things like, say you might want to reference a file or perform a function in Python. We probably won't use them much here, but they're really handy. You can really start to customize Touch Designer in the DAT area. And comps are components, so things like a camera. If you have a 3D shape that you need to render into 2D to see on the screen, you need a camera, you need a light, and you need something that can read the geometry, and various other components that we'll probably use from time to time. But today, we're going to work mainly with tops and a little bit with chops. So, in the top menu here, and just a reminder, if you can't see this menu, just double click and it'll pop up. I'm going to type in RECT. Actually, no. I'm going to type in MOVIE, movie file in, and then I'm going to double click again, and I'm going to put OUT, out. Okay, if I join up the movie file to the out, and I go into our perform mode, which is this button here, somewhere on your screen you'll probably get, something like this will pop up. That's your network in perform mode. Now, if you close this, it will quit Touch Designer. So instead, you just want to hit escape, and you're back in your network. If it popped up on the wrong screen, what we can do is if I roll my mouse out, I zoom out, I'm going to come to the upper layer of the project where I can tell Touch Designer how to behave when we go into perform mode. This is our perform window. So here, for example, I can set that monitor, because I've got two screens connected here. Monitor 0 is my laptop screen and monitor 1 is my external monitor. So if I hit 1 there and we go into perform mode, it's now popping up on my external monitor. And then we can also choose the size of our perform mode. So somewhere around here, where are we? So we can go to our opening size and we can hit fill. So now if I go into perform, I'm at full screen, but I can also probably turn off my borders. Let's hit that. And now we're at full screen without the little window borders. And for an art installation or performance or most applications, that's probably what you want. Okay, so we're just going to zoom back into the project, and let's start to customize this. So with this movie file in, this banana texture, that's one of the default textures that Touch Designer will reference, but we're going to change that for our own video. So I'm just going to go to the file browser here, and I'm going to navigate to our Touch Designer window. Sorry, our Touch Designer folder. Whoop. And I believe I put one of these in here, in the movie, and I just put this one here, one of Jivon's samples. So if I hit open, now we've got this file playing here. And what we can do, if we want to see it as we work, on the out node, we can just click this little blue button here, which is display, and that will just display whichever node you put that blue thing on. So if I do it to both of them, it'll display them both twice. Sometimes that can be useful if you want to check what effects you're working with. Sometimes it's better to have nothing because it can be a little distracting. Just depends on what you're doing. So now if I go into perform mode, we're just seeing the video. So that's cool. The first thing you'll notice is there's no sound. So if we want sound, we actually need an audio device in and an audio file in and an audio device out. So if I make an audio file in chop, and then I can make an audio, just typing here to filter my search, audio device out. So a file in, that's referencing an audio file, device out, that will reference my speakers. If I connect these, I'll start hearing. We can see there's something there because we can see the waveform. If I connect this to the top channel here, we hear, I'll just turn it down a little bit. If I turn that down, that's just a default audio file that Touch Designer has, just like the banana. Okay, so let's say we don't want to hear this audio. I'll just delete that. Let's say we want to hear the audio of the movie. So here we just have to go to audio movie, and that's just going to look for the audio signal of this movie top, and we just have to tell it which file to look for. If you don't see these windows up here, just press the letter P. That's P for parameter, and that will just show you the parameters of whichever operator you've selected. Okay, so this is looking for a movie file in, and here, this name here, we can use that as an address, and we can call that sort of whenever we need to. So it's called movie file in 1. So all I need to do here on the audio movie is just type in movie file in 1, hit enter, and now we can see that is sending the sound to here, and if I connect that here, I'll turn that down. There's the original sound from Jivon's video. Okay, so now we've sort of recreated that little section of video, but we're going to play with it a little bit. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect that sound, and I'm going to put on that sound I had before because I kind of like it. Another way you can bring in operators is you can drag and drop. So if I go into my audio file and I grab this sound that I had, I can just drag it in, and that will come in as an audio file in. And I can connect it up here. And now we've got that weird, scary beat that I was listening to before, which I find kind of cool. I kind of like working with it. If I turn it up a bit, yeah, I kind of like it. But I'll leave that low at the moment. We'll come back to it, and I'll delete this Well, actually, you can leave it there. It's not doing any harm. And if you want to use that that sound later, you definitely can. So we're going to start playing around a little bit with, first of all, compositing. So here we've got our movie file in going straight to this output. What we usually do here before we start working around is we'd put in these things called nulls. And a null is really just like a placeholder so that after we've done some work here, we'd have this sort of final point after we've sort of done our programming that sends to the next part of our network. And what's cool about that is that if we make a whole bunch of changes here and say something is reading that address, whatever we change here, our connections will still work. So having a null after certain operations is just a good habit to get into. Okay, so let's add, I'm going to double click with my left mouse, and this time I'm going to add a rectangle here. Okay, so this shape, it brings up the question of resolution and size. So because I've got an educational license, if I middle mouse click here on any node, it'll show me the parameters that it's transmitting. And here I'm sending 1920 by 1080, where yours is probably sending 1240 by 720, I think is the resolution. So I'm just going to change mine to your resolution. I'm going to right click here. I can right click on this line and insert an operator, and I'm going to type in fit. Fit is really handy if you just want to switch resolutions. So I'm going to go into the common tab here, and I'm going to change the resolution to 1280 by 720. And we can determine how it fits. We can fit best, or we can keep the native resolution, which it will crop it. That's, in this case, it's not really making a difference. But depending on what your artwork is, you may or may not want to either zoom in or crop. Okay, so now if I middle mouse click here, I'm going at 1280 by 720 and all the way out. That's good. Okay, so this rectangle. First of all, I'm going to make its resolution the same. I'm going to make that 1280 by 720. And then I'm going to add a transform, TRANS, to filter. There's my transform. And maybe I will also go to a null, because I might do some more transforms. Then if I want to put this rectangle on top of this, we need to composite. So I'm going to right click here, and I'm going to add a composite. And a composite node is really just what happens between your Photoshop layers, right? It's just putting two things on top of one another according to a certain compositing algorithm. So at the moment, our algorithm is set to multiply, which is multiplying the pixel values against one another. I can, okay, yeah, we'll change this first. We're going to do something really simple. We're going to go over. So that is one on top of the other. And at the moment, our video is on top of the square, so we can't see the square at all. We can, if you go into the composite parameters and you click these little arrows, you can just swap the order of what's happening in your composite, and now we have the square on top of the video. If we go back to the transform, we can change the size of the square. If I just type 0.5 into the scale X and 0.5 into the scale Y, now we have a smaller square sitting on top. I could go into the I could go into the color of the rectangle. Sorry, I was just thinking where that would be. That would be here. The fill color, and I could make it any color we want, yellow or green or whatever. I might leave it at white for now. And then, okay, what should we do next? Well, let's have another look at these compositing settings. So over is, the simplest to understand. That's probably by default what most of your Photoshop layer blend properties would be. I think we can just kind of click through them, and if you look at the name, you could actually just Wikipedia, what is a composition by average. My guess is it's looking at the average RGB values per pixel, so the white is resulting in a higher average, and here we have no color values and alpha, so it's becoming half transparent and half what the video is. Some of these, to be honest, off the top of my head, brightest seems pretty straightforward. Burn color, I'd have to look it up, but these words here, things like dodge and burn, come from photographic developing. But I'd have to be specific. I'd have to, look a little bit at some documentation. Speaking of which, if you want to look at documentation, you can do that. If you click on a question mark on any of these nodes, it should open up the Touch Designer documentation page. So here it's telling us all about the composite top, all about its different parameters, and it's probably got something about different blend modes if we click through. Okay, so let's go back to a top for now, or over, I think is what we had. Okay, so let's go back to, we're going to go back to chop world. We had the sound chop here, and the reason that's kind of flatlining is because I set the volume to 0. If I put that up again, we'll start to see the waveforms there. And in fact, on my audio device out, I might turn the volume down, and I might leave the volume here up, because we're going to use that in a moment. Before we do, we're going to use a chop to change some parameters of the square. So I'm going to go and get that chop we looked at before, which is called an LFO. I'm going to add an LFO, and similarly like last time, I'm going to go out to a null. And then what we're going to do, this is where Touch Designer starts to get really fun, is we're going to take this value and we're going to use it to change some parameter of the rectangle. And I want to change the opacity of the rectangle, as in whether we can see it or whether it's transparent. So I'm going to right click here, insert an operator, and we're going to add a level. Okay. And level, you've probably seen functions like this in Photoshop as well, adjusting the levels of an image. And we're going to look at what we're going to look at is the opacity here. So this opacity here allows us to just move from, alpha 0, alpha 1, opacity, opacity 100%, opacity 0%. And so here if we've got a number between 0 and 1, at the moment our LFO is going between, if we zoom in, it's going between -1 and 1. So we want to change the range of that to 0 and 1. So I'm going to right click here and I'm going to insert a math. And we're going to change the range of that from -1 to 1, converted to 0 and 1. So now if you look at the first LFO going from -1 to 1, and then once we get to the math, it's only ranging to 0 and 1. And this is a really important function. It's something that will be incredibly handy depending on different signals you're using and what you want them to achieve. So if we go back into this level, this is a great trick. We're going to click this Viewer Active button that we described in the beginning, and I'm going to click and drag it with the level selected. I'm going to click and drag it over the opacity, and I'm going to say chop reference. And what we've got there, if we open that up, it's actually just calling the name of that operator. It says operator null3, which is what it says here, null3, and then chan1. So we could also have just typed that ourselves if we got the syntax right. Okay, so now we've got that chop driving the opacity of that square. If I turn my sound back up, it's kind of a fun coincidence that the pulsing is almost in time. And what I want you to start thinking about is these sort of parameters can be put all over the place. I'll turn the sound down a little bit. We could have this parameter on a color parameter on our video. So if we look at our movie file, I might turn my sound down even more. Maybe I'll turn it to 0 while we're working. If I go after my fit and before my composite, I can put in something like HSV adjust, and we could just play around with really any parameter you want. Our saturation modifier will put us to black and white or highly saturated. I'll put that back to 1. Our hue offset will shift the color of the video around. Again, these are probably really basic 2D image editing features that you might have looked at in Photoshop. Now, the only thing really you need to pay attention to is the numbers that each slider requires. So our hue offset will go from minus 360 to positive 360. If you think of a color wheel, you know, the 360 is just representing degrees of the circle. So if we were to put in the same oscillator here, we'd need a different range, right? And I'll show you what I mean. If I go into this HSV adjust and I try putting this into my hue offset, we can't really see anything happening, right? We can't see any color change. And that's because we're only shifting it by 1/360th of what that slider really is looking to do. So instead, what I could do is I could just middle mouse click on the join here, grab another math, join it down here. I'll just middle mouse click there, grab another null, pop it there. And this time I'm going to adjust my range from -1 to 1 to 0 to 360. Oops, 361, 0 to 360. Now if you look at that null down there, now we're going in a much larger range. And if I look in my HSV adjust, I can actually just change the number of this null to null 4. And that should, if it's called Chan1, which it is, put a 4 there. And there we go. So because we've sent that number to a different position, we're now getting a far more kind of interesting result. All right, I might turn that off for now. It's just sort of a bit of an example. It's going to drive me crazy looking at it for too long. Okay, so what's some other stuff that we can look at? Well, we could have a look at our compositing mode. Now that we've got this white square going back and forth, you could honestly just have a play around and see if any of the compositing modes look kind of interesting to you. I think I was playing around with this before and I found some things I liked. Yeah, you can just find all sorts of kind of, you know, that looks kind of cool. I think difference would be doing something like, instead of adding the values of the pixels together, it's subtracting the values of the pixels from one another. And we're starting to get this strange effect. And, you know, I really like just starting with something and playing around, but, you know, if we change the size of that square, and we can even change its location, if I look in the transforms and I translate, I wanted to stay on the bird, but it's actually the video is moving around a bit. I wanted to have it on the middle of the bird. Actually, that brings me to another point. What if we wanted the video to loop? You know, here we're just playing the video according to, it's just playing itself, you know, from start to finish and looping. Well, we could, if we wanted the video to loop, we could actually use our LFO and we could put that into the play speed of the video. For example, if I put this speed to 1, it'll slow the video down to 10% of its speed. Or if I give myself, if I give myself an LFO, like here, and just grab a null, if I put this LFO into the video speed, we'll have the video be sort of ping-ponging back and forth. So if I just go viewer active here, and I'm going to drag this onto the speed with my left click and then release and hit chop reference. So now we've got the video sort of playing back and forth. What we might do though, if you think of speed, this is probably a bit strange. It's speeding up and slowing down a lot. So I would change the frequency here to 0.1. And I would also change the type of signal this is, from a sine to a triangle. So the triangle, if you think of the shape of a triangle, a sine is like a wave. A triangle is just a constant speed increase from the positive direction to the negative. A square would be just kind of jumping from one to the other, and it'll probably have a sharper jump when we change directions. We'll probably see, yeah, we'll see that little jump. Whereas a triangle should give us kind of like a slightly smoother transition. And now we've got this sort of smoother, endlessly looping video. Okay, so I want to show you, at this point, one of the things that kind of everybody wants to do is to use, you know, real-time signals to drive things. And I want to show you the difference between using a real-time signal to drive something and using a smooth signal like an LFO. So this is the last thing we're going to do in this tutorial. Then I'm going to make a second tutorial where we'll do some other 2D effects. But what I want to do is I want to make a second rectangle, and this time we're going to use the sound to drive the rectangle. So okay, let's what you can also see is we're starting to have a lot of nodes, and later in the semester I'm going to talk to you about how to kind of organize our project. The one thing I'm doing here, you know, we can start actually putting these in folders and all sorts of things later. But the one thing I'm doing, I'm just trying to have everything be reasonably organized and logical. So I'm moving from left to right. I'm having things in relatively straight lines. Here I'm leaving a gap because I might do some more compositing later. And here I'm sort of organizing my SOPs and my surface operators here, and my signals and my chops here. Just for logic, but depending on the type of project, you know, the organization might change a little bit. Okay, so let's make a second rectangle, and this time we're going to use a sound signal to do some of this operation. So to make a second rectangle, the cool thing is we don't need to make another rectangle here. All we need to do is do a different transform. And this is where Touch Designer gets quite cool. So if I pop this in here, I can see in this one we had 0.2 and 0.2, so let's make it the same size. But this time I can move it. You know, I could say move it like 0.2 on the x-axis, but at the moment we can't see it. And the reason we can't see it is we need to composite it together. So what we can do is, I'm just going to hide this for a second so I can sort of see my network a little better. I'm going to right click here and we're going to add a composite. Pop this here, and we're going to, I'll just pop this out to a null. I'm going to pop this in here, and we can't see anything here. Let's just check our composite settings. Let's put this to over. Okay, so now we can see both rectangles, and we've lost something here. Oh no, sorry, just because I turned the preview off. Okay, so there we go. We've got this second rectangle here, and it's being composited with the same difference function that we had here. So if I put that back to over, we'll see the two white rectangles, but that difference looks kind of cool. It's starting to do nice things with the color. Okay, so what we had on this one is we took that level and we used the LFO. I'm just going to turn this off again. We used the LFO here to drive that level. But what if we used, maybe this time we should use the sound of the original video rather than the sound I wanted to listen to. So here we've got the audio movie out, and I'm just going to disconnect my soundtrack here, and I'm going to put in this sound we had here, and I'll pop the volume back up to 1. It's probably going to sound weird because we're playing the video back and forth. Wow, okay, that's kind of cool. I didn't think about that, but that's kind of interesting, huh? Okay, right, yeah, okay. The things we find by accident, that's great. Let's use that signal. Okay, so. Okay, I'm going to turn it down because it'll be a little distracting. Okay, so how can we use this signal? First of all, let's just, let's make a little space for ourselves. I'll drag this stuff down, and let's start filtering that signal. And we're going to filter it without changing what's going to the device out, because what we've going out already sounds pretty cool. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab something called a select, and select just means I can grab one channel, because we just need one signal to drive our opacity. So I'll just grab channel 1. Now we've got one signal. Now filtering audio, we can start with an audio filter, pop that in here, and maybe we can do a high pass filter and remove some of the high. I might actually listen to this. Yeah, so here we're not getting much through our high pass filter. Might just listen to this for a second, see what we get. Okay. Okay, now that filter's actually not helping, so I'm going to remove that filter. Okay, instead, maybe let's just try, I might just go straight to an analyze. I might link a few tutorials for filtering audio, because filtering audio, it can really depend on what your signal coming in is. Here, I might also just put in, look at audio spectrum. Audio spectrum. Let's just see what we get. Okay, that's starting to clean up a little bit, and we've got this number that's going up from 0, which is quite cool, to, let's see what it went up to about 0.05 or something like that. So what we're going to do here is I'm just going to put in a math, and we're going to go from 0 to 0.05, and we're going to make that from 0 to 1. So what that should mean is that we get a nice kind of functional value coming in here. I might even make that number a little bit smaller, like 0.03, because we want to have some of our values getting all the way up to 1. Okay, maybe even smaller. There we go. Okay, so let's try that. So I'm going to put that out to a null, and then what we're going to do, I might just turn that down. I'm going to put this number onto the opacity of that second square and just see what we get. So let's go back and add another level, and let's go back to where we can access the opacity, and this time we're going to just drag this chop reference here. So that means that technically every time the baby cries, let's just turn our volume back up, the square will start to come in. So if I'm quiet, okay, cool. So that works just fine. I'm going to turn that down again because it's such a strange sound. Okay, so I think what I want you to see here is just possibility, right? Here at the moment, we're just putting in a square, but this signal could be sent anywhere, right? It could be sent to, we're going to look in another tutorial to how we might transition between two videos. So we might be crossfading. It could be sent to the color. Actually, to wrap this up, let's do that on the color of the video. That could be kind of nice because the opacity of this square is kind of boring. So let's go to this HSV adjust, and let's try it on the color. Let's do what we did before. Let's grab that sound signal, and I'm going to change that math. I'm going to delete that second square because I don't, it's not very interesting. So I'm just going to delete that, delete these. And let's go and change that. Instead of 0 to 1, let's do 0 to 360. And let's put this on the color. So I'll just turn viewer active to that null that's coming out of the video sound, and I'm going to grab it and drag it onto the hue offset, and then click chop reference. So now if I turn the audio back on, and then the video goes back to normal. I mean, and this works pretty well, actually, better than I thought, because the only reason this works so well is because there's actually a lot of silence before the signal. But you'll see that when we're playing it, it's a bit jumpy, it's a bit noisy, and that's really what I wanted to show, that depending on the rhythm you want, you know, if I go back, if I tried to put in, let's say I wanted to put in like my audio beat, we probably wouldn't get as smooth a signal as we're getting from here. But okay, I'm going to finish this video here, and in the next video we're going to do another form of 2D compositing, and we're going to look at a feedback network. So I'll stop this video and then we'll start straight back up again.